Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours, where we answer your questions on media and production. If you're new around here, want to find out a little bit more about us, just head over to officehours.global. There you can also click join us, get on our daily email, find out what we're talking about every single day on the daily show. This show is driven by your questions, which you, of course, can get into us via Makana. While you're in Makana, you can also vote on the other questions, live chat with the other producers. If you're not there, no worries. AskOfficeHours.global is for you. That's AskOfficeHours.global, and that's open 24/7. So if you're going about your day, you encounter a situation that you'd like a little bit of help with, we're here for you. Just go to AskOfficeHours.global, put your question in, we'll get it onto the show. But Bill, let's dive into those questions.
Absolutely. The first one this morning comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, how has the era of Reels/Shorts and other snackable video content influenced editorial workflows?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I'm not sure. I guess on editorial workflows, I'd have to say that I often worry on Office Hours if when answering a question, I need to restate it. Like, let's see, how has it affected editor? And if I need to keep my answers in a snackable less than 30-second response, which is really tough for me. And as far as my viewing habits goes, I'm not one who walks around on their phone all day looking for 30 seconds worth of entertainment. I want to get into a subject. I'll sit down. I'll put YouTube up on the 75-inch screen and a bowl of popcorn and educate myself on a number of new topics. And I don't like the shorts because they seem like just a collection of teasers. It's like watching a bunch of movie trailers. So I guess I'm not a good one to answer that since I don't edit them. So maybe our editors will be chiming in.
Bill?
Well, I think all editors, the reason you're doing this is to attract an audience. So you're going to pay attention to what attracts an audience. And we've watched the shortening of attention spans for people and their content preferences for years now. I mean, I used to be contracted a lot to make 40-minute, hour and 10-minute training programs and things like that. And that all just went away at some point. And people wanted shorter and shorter and shorter. And in the era of click-through sites where you're watching a whole bunch of poster frames and attracting somebody's attention, keeping it for a reasonable period of time, the targets are different now than they used to be. So with everybody swiping through things and consuming on the go on mobile devices particularly, yes, it's going to change how editors produce content. Right now, being concise and getting the point and making something really interesting that'll keep somebody viewing for a minute or two is equally as valid a task as it was when I was building longer form commercials or programs and had a captive audience sitting in a corporate environment.
Alex?
First of all, we don't have to change anything about what we do here. It doesn't, if we do shorts, these are 4 to 6 minutes out of 2 hours. It doesn't really, people can say whatever they're going to say. so it doesn't really, and we haven't done them recently, but we will be doing more as we move forward. But it doesn't really affect how we should be thinking here. What we should be thinking, of course, is of being complete but succinct, and not wandering around. so that's not a 1 minute thing or a 2 minute thing. Sometimes we chew on a question for 8 or 10 or 12 or even 20 minutes, and that's totally fine. But what I would say is that, and I don't think that for a lot of people, shorts are really affecting the other pieces of content. So that you have a lot of content that's out there, and they all have different needs. So one of the things we found is that live tends to want to go longer. So live tends to want, the live audience needs to warm up. It needs interactivity. It has an entirely different way of connecting with the audience. And so I would usually, when someone asks me about a live, I say 30 to 40 minutes is the minimum that you want to do live. And then you can go as long as you want. As long as you still have things to talk about. Then you have VOD, and usually the VOD stuff, people do 20-minute and 30-minute pieces. I find my own behavior for that is that anything over 6 or 8 minutes, I'm going to start skipping through it. I'm going to move my cursor and see where the hills are in YouTube and just try to jump to those things to see if it's worth watching. So I get really picky after about 6 or 8 minutes. More than 8 minutes is about when I start to just go, we'll see if this is really worth my time. And even with, with snackables, the 1 minute shorts or whatever, they have about 10 seconds to be interesting. So what's really important is that front end of, am I going to actually keep on watching this? And I watch TikTok every morning while I'm biking. Again, you got 10 seconds, and I'm saying that pretty conservatively. It's usually 2 to 3 seconds. I'm going to make a split decision about whether I'm going to watch this video for longer, and then I'm going to keep on making decisions about moving on. So it's just a different world. What a lot of folks that I've been talking to have been talking about is that live is really good to develop a relationship with your audience. VODs are really good to build your audience, and shorts are really good at building awareness. They don't really drive subscriptions, but they have people know that you exist. And so those are so you think about those three things. I don't think that each one of them affects each other that much, to be honest. You may take a shortened piece of something and put it out there, but it's very different. And in the same way, audio tends to be able to go very long because people are willing to sit there and listen to it. Video tends to want to go shorter because people you have to monotask. Audio is a multitask solution, and so when you're doing multitasking, people are very patient with you, and they'll let you talk a lot more. Where you monotask, you really have to get to the point. So those are the things that you and we kind of sit somewhere in between that, because we don't have all the stats, but we believe 60 to 70% of our viewers, quote unquote viewers for office hours, are listeners. so we can drag on a little bit in that area.
Courtney?
Yeah, I was just going to ask. I don't submit any of these short videos. Is there a suggested time limit or an enforced time limit on YouTube Shorts to appear on that 1 minute? Can't be longer than 1 minute. And on Reels? It literally
can't be. It's 59.9. It is. It's a hard. If you give it a 60 second, like it went over by 0.1 second, it's now just a video. It's vertical.
Okay. It moves you out of the shorts category.
Yeah.
Okay.
Alexander?
Yeah, and on that note, with Instagram too, if you want to boost a post on Instagram to advertise, your reel cannot be longer than 90 seconds. So that's something to keep in mind. You can make longer videos, but you can't advertise on them. So that's the restriction with Instagram. And to the point of the question, how has it influenced editorial workflows? Well, for me, it's a constant battle of there's only so much time in the week that I have. So I'm always looking for shortcuts of how do I cut this content quicker, more efficiently, and certainly the tools and technology that we have now. I use DaVinci Resolve. That's gotten better over time, and I'm very much looking forward to DaVinci Resolve 19 with all the AI features. I mean, the ability to just type in a keyword and go, okay, what did that person say? I know it's somewhere in this 2-hour podcast, but I'm not sure where that is. That's going to be a massive game changer. So I think we're going to see huge sweeping changes in technology that's really going to help us in the efficiency department. So stay tuned for that.
One really interesting thing, if we look at those content forms from a creator perspective, what a lot of people are finding is TikToks or short form content is great for discovery, but you can't hold people with that. There's these really interesting cases where people with millions and millions of views on a TikTok, they can't extend that audience to then buy something or to go somewhere. So it's really interesting to see a lot of the TikTokers or the short form video creators go to a longer form content. And even TikTok now has a program that rewards you for creating videos that are longer than a minute and 9x6, 16:9 again and all that. So it's kind of coming all around. But for editing, I don't think it influences it too much. Yes, there's a new delivery format, but if you talk to people like Chris Fenwick, he doesn't care what format it is. He has been editing on weird formats all his life. If it is for a huge big wall or if it's for a phone, it doesn't really matter for a good editor. But what's also important for people to realize is you can use your editor who does your big production to also give you highlights. In the past, you might have used that for highlight reels. Now you might want to use it for TikToks or Reels and that type of content. But your editor who already worked through all your footage probably is a great choice to do that and help you tell the story that you want to tell with your main piece, also in the smaller pieces, and build a spline. And that's, I think, what's get lost if you use AI and Opus sometimes, because you can only get the footage that is seen there, but your editor also has seen all the footage that he doesn't take.
Alex?
Yeah, and I think where Opus, because we're using Opus for a lot of the stuff that we do, is, the bottom line is that if you want to get something out, sometimes there's a certain level of labor, like it won't go out if you do it by hand. So if you, and so I think in the case where you have the budget and you have the time or the time to do it, I think definitely by hand is always the better solution. But you do have to take into account, like, well, this is better than nothing, and it does a pretty good job. What I'm amazed at with Opus is how it pulls things out that I wouldn't have thought were that interesting. But when looking at them on their atomized, you're like, oh, it's kind of cool, and so I think that, those are the kind of things that are kind of interesting about those tools. But again, I agree very much with Jonas that these are, that a lot of the stuff, the discoverability, and you want to think about all of this as an ecosystem that you're using all of those things. Most of the agencies that we work with are using all of these for different things. And so, and I think that the problem for creators is a lot of times they get into one, like they get a lot of following on TikTok, so that's all they do. And so they, the smart creators are typically doing something on TikTok. I was talking to a YouTuber that I only know as a YouTuber, and they were going to a Facebook event. And I was just like, because they have a huge Facebook group that they're part of, and then they also do things on TikTok, shortened bits and pieces. They have things on Twitter. And you just have to kind of think about, I know X, but I've just given up. I've decided not to call it X anymore. I'm just going to keep calling it Twitter because everyone knows what I mean. But the idea is, and then Instagram is another one that has been very successful for people to turn into money. So these are all, I think that the key here, the real lesson is to use each one of these for what they're good at and not try to force them into something that they're not good at.
Bill?
I just wanted to make a really quick content, not on workflows, but on the actual editing. It does make a difference for me as an editor because I gave an example yesterday on the show when we were talking about Oppenheimer, and I was showing a clip that Cillian Murphy was acting in. And the fact that the editor allowed the sigh at the end of the line, which was important for the character. If I was working in 60 seconds, I probably wouldn't have had time to do that. So I would have changed my editorial decision based on the amount of time I was allowed to work in, and that is an influence on editors.
Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. YouTube is now offering ultra-low latency streaming. Has anyone tried this option?
Jonas?
So that's not really new. It's about 3 years old. The really important thing to know with this is YouTube can't beat physics. So they still need to get the packet from A to B on a global scale. So how do they shave off this latency? They shave it off by removing the buffer that you have at the front of your video. So instead of playing the video as the player playing the video, the frames as it gets it, normally it builds a little buffer. So if there then is a frame late, or maybe you have some network issues, someone is like walking around the house and switches Wi-Fi access points, did you still have an uninterrupted video experience? What ultra-low latency does is it pulls out that buffer and shortens it to a minimum. But what that also means is now everybody that has not the best network, and that can be even just on Wi-Fi, will have a degradation of quality of service and has an issue where, like, you now have a high jitter or similar to that. You will see a lot more playback issues. So I only use it if there's a really good reason for it. And it's funny that they call it ultra low latency below 5 seconds, because like a lot of the ultra low latency now is like below 500 milliseconds, and ultra low latency kind of doesn't mean anything anymore because it's 50 milliseconds to 5 seconds. But yeah, I wouldn't use it. We tried it, and every time you have people, especially from countries where the quality of service isn't as great or on the road, that say, oh yeah, it's lagging, it's bugging, I don't hear it well, I wouldn't use it if you don't need to.
Alex?
Yeah, so yeah, exactly what Jonas said. The low latency cuts most of the buffer out. The ultra low latency not only cuts the buffer out, but lowers the quality. So while your VOD will be full quality, I believe that it's limited to 360p or something for the low latency. Now, what I tend to do is I tend to distinguish between low latency and what I call real time. And real time for me is under 400 milliseconds. So If it's under 400 milliseconds, you're at real time. That's WebRTC, typically a world of WebRTC, slightly below the world of SRT at its lowest settings. And so I define that as real time. And then anything under about 3 seconds, I think of as ultra low latency. Anything under 10 seconds is low latency. Anything over 10 seconds is just normal latency. And many of the streams that we see oftentimes have a higher latency. If you don't. And it really depends. And most of this has been driven, and this is really solving the wrong problem. Most of this is driven because the chat functions in most social networks are trash. And so because the chat function is trash, they're trying to fix it with lowering the latency because people are trying to look at the thing, the people coming by and responding to it. And it's just a disaster. The latency between when you asked this question, Andy, and when we answered it was 1 hour. So the thing is that by fixing some of those issues, we don't have to worry as much about that problem. But the reason people keep on going back is they want to have this chat with the audience. And it's just they're fixing the wrong problem. And so the ultra low latency lowers the quality, it lowers the user experience, and it doesn't really. I don't think it gives you the upside because if you get a lot of people watching, that chat function that you were trying to fix becomes useless. Look at someone who has you watch the chat function once you get to about 500 concurrent users. I was watching one yesterday on Resolve, and they got to about 500, and that chat is useless. Like it's no longer a discussion, because it's not, and because it's moving so quickly, it doesn't mean anything anymore. So it fixes something for a moment and then it doesn't fix it at all. so I don't think that it's a useful thing to use.
Courtney?
Yeah, I kind of had a related question. Maybe Jonas can answer this. Is if you're submitting I've never done live YouTube videos. I've always uploaded and they transcode. Do they have a recommended codec bitrate and resolution for your stream that it has to match their resolution for low latency? Yeah.
Well, no, not for low latency, just in general. YouTube doesn't make you change something for low latency because what they're doing is they're taking away the buffer on the other side. They don't need you to do anything different. Mm-hmm. And so really, interestingly enough, a bunch of the latency that's in the what they call ultra low latency is actually your delivery to them is a little bit lower. So, a little bit higher. So that's what's really limiting their ability to get to a lower, a lower latency.
So they don't have to transcode on the way in.
They are always transcoding. YouTube always transcodes. So Twitch doesn't always transcode. It'll pass through your highest resolution, but in others, and YouTube is the most robust social streaming platform. So it takes many different things. Now it may not be as nice, it may not work as well, but it will take almost anything you throw at it and put something out, put something out the other end because it has a very robust pipeline to do the transcode. If you send the wrong thing to LinkedIn or Twitter or some of the other ones, they're pretty finicky about what you deliver to them. It's totally usable, but you just have to know that you can't be lazy about how you set it up in the way that you can with YouTube. Now, there is optimum settings, and YouTube has a page that tells you these are the optimum settings where you're going to get the best performance, and you should follow that for YouTube, for LinkedIn, for Facebook. Look at what they're doing, and that's why you can't have one encode going out to everything all the time. You need to have something in there that's transcoding your signal for each one of those social platforms so that you're delivering the absolute best pixels and sound to each one of them the way that their platform is designed to take it.
Next question.
Alexander Knight in Port Coquitlam, BC, and here on the panel is the director of photography, ever involved in color grading and editing processes in tandem with the director to ensure the creative vision has consistency?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Not editing so much, but definitely color correction. If you work with a DP, especially if they're working in film, they will, at least on the first few days or the first few days of a location shoot, they will get up early and go to the colorist where they've done dailies. They've processed the film overnight and they're color grading and doing dailies for the next day. And he will sit in on the color grading session with the colorist and achieve the look that the DP really has intended for that. Of course, they will discuss that with the director, what kind of look he's going for all beforehand. And to achieve that look, the DP frequently will go in with the colorist, at least on the first few days, through a first few scenes to set the the basic look that they want for this movie or this particular scene. Editing, they don't get involved too much in the editing process. Usually that's the director and the editor's domain there. But the DP will just send in notes. And they used to, and they work now with the DIT on set with digital cameras if they're shooting electronic, which is these days almost everybody. And they will sit with the DIT and do a color grade that they like, and then the DIT will submit those digital imaging technician, is what DIT stands for, will then submit those color settings to the colorist who's assembling the dailies for the editorial. So they'll submit those color settings from the set, the DP.
Alex?
If you ever see the emails in the behind the scenes, sometimes they do definitely try to become part of the coloring process. So there's oftentimes a lot of angry emails going back and forth, like, you're ruining my vision. You're da 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 da. You know, like it's a pretty can be somewhat cantankerous setup, because they have a vision of what this should look like. They saw it on a monitor when they were there. This is what they expect, and the colorist and the director go a different direction, you know, when they're there, because they've got a lot of and sometimes DPs want to burn in their stuff, and that became a thing for a little while, and then it fell away because the producers wouldn't put up with it. And so they're like, we paid for it, we'll have it as much dynamic range as we can have. And so there was a lot of back and forth there. I think that when it works the best is when they all know each other and trust each other. So when there's trust across that team, where the colorist and I've seen shows where the colorist is working with the DIT, with the DP on the set. Those are really bigger budgets where they can afford to have that happen. But the colorist will be sitting there with them, and they're all having a discussion about what that looks like and how it works. And there's a little bit more camaraderie there. And then it still may change a little bit, but it changes a lot less because they had the discussion, they understand the thought process, and they're all kind of working through that. And so it really depends. But the teams that are the most cohesive, that work with each other movie after movie after movie, and that's the thing that is happening more and more. That it seems, you have teams of people that like to work with each other, and because they get into a pattern that makes sense.
Bill?
What Alex said, it has to do with the director's comfort with his or her or their team. It's all about the director is in charge. I mean, that's just really on large film sets, that's the person with the responsibility for making the decisions. If they have a team they work closely with, they will involve anybody they want to and bring them into the edit suite should they want to. But in most of the serious editors that I talk to, it's really they've gotten this relationship going, and now the director trusts them to do first cuts and assemblies of scenes and things like that, and then they get together and decide how to tune things up after that. But they're given a certain amount of autonomy, at least in the beginning, but at some point the director takes control and says, this is what's going to happen, and that's kind of the final say in all the big films. Alexander?
Yeah, and on a related note too, I'm curious because now we're very blessed with technology. We have modern day cameras that have these massive sensors, and with modern day glass too, can take in so much light. So one of the things that I've heard from actors too, and I guess they're not always communicated to properly, is that the sets are so dark now on a lot of shows that they're always concerned that it's not going to get lit properly, but it is. And I'm just curious with DPs, do they carry a light meter? Do they take measurements? Or do they just go by eye now? I don't know if they need to do that.
Alex?
100% they have light meters. So they have light meters, they have colorimeters, and a lot of us are looking at scopes. I don't think that, a DP may be looking at something like that, but you really don't know what you're looking at unless you have the data. So you'll see them out there with either a color meter or a light meter. They'll have they'll also have, and they'll be checking those things. I will say that the more modern ones will just look at scopes. Scopes are going to give you way more information than the light meter, in my opinion. But that's a whole nother. That's a religious discussion. We try to stay out of religion here on the show. But generally, there's a lot of data that you're looking at. There's so much money you're spitting out, especially on a larger. But that's really the data of, is the data there to use later, is really more up to the DIT than it is up to the DP. Is their job is to tell people, like, hey, we're going into we're going into the blacks, or we're over, whatever. And their job is to work with engineering to make sure that doesn't happen. So those are, that's a little outside of that, but there's definitely a ton of data about all the things that are happening on the set for any major release. Now, independent films are completely different. You see the results sometimes.
All right, Bill, dust off your Sekonic. What do you got?
Very, very quickly, DP is one of the most, I think, overused and understood terms in production, because on resume films, small teams, they go, I'm the DP. And a serious DP working at the Hollywood level is almost as much scientist as they are creative. They really need to understand deeply the technical aspects of film and exposure and color and everything that's going into that. And the good ones are brilliant at that. So just understand that it's a very, very, very technical position at the level of Hollywood, where you have to have an amazing ability to understand the differences in lighting, film stocks, digital if you're doing digital, whatever it is. It takes years to seriously ascend to that at the highest level. It is not a toss-off term at all. Lighting cameraman in the English system, but director of photography really does mean something.
Courtney?
Yes, I worked for years in the 80s with the same director, and he had his gaffer named Bill King, who was a seasoned pro gaffer. He was the lighting director on I Love Lucy. That tells you how far back he goes. And he would go out, he'd light the scene, and he would hold up his fist and look at it, and he'd go 4, 5, 6 split. And I used to joke with him that if he washed his hands, he'd have to have his eyes recalibrated, because his fist wouldn't look the same anymore. But he was always right. And they would take the meter out there. The DP would go, he's right again.
Next question.
Paul Wallace, Hot Springs, Arkansas. Compare OneDrive, Dropbox, Google Drive, Box, Amazon Drive /S3, and Microsoft 365 as production storage solutions for audio and video.
Jonas?
I'll try to compare a couple of those, otherwise we'll be here the rest of the day. That being said, I would kind of put OneDrive, Dropbox, Google Drive, Box into Amazon Drive. Is Amazon Drive even still alive? Those are like consumer-ish file management solutions. They all come with a sync client that allows you to either mount them as a drive or have them sync to a local drive. A couple of things you need to be aware of with that is, if you use a sync client, you need to be aware that there's somewhere it stores its temporary files that you sync down. So you need to make sure that you are really sure that the files that you're writing or the files that you're reading from for your production are actually there on the drive, and that it's not suddenly in the middle of the show going to be like, oh, sorry, that segment of that 3-hour video that your client paid you to play out, I don't have that one. Let me download it real quick while all your viewers wait, because that's not going to go well. S3 really is an API solution for block storage. We use it a lot for our productions, where we talk about that. We can talk about that later on the cloud production part, where we can take any of our recordings and push it to S3. Then in Retool, we build S3 viewers for all our clients. So a client can just go in and search their own S3 bucket in something that looks more consumer friendly, like Dropbox, Google Drive. One thing also to note is Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive are known to also limit your bandwidth when it comes to up and downloading from the cloud. And nothing is more frustrating than sitting in the cloud and just waiting for the upload to go. And you're like, well, the backup to S3 is already done for the last 30 minutes, but Dropbox is limiting you to X amount of Mbits per and all that. So that's where I would take something more professional like S3. You also didn't mention any of the production storages that I would think about, like Lucid and other solutions like that. Yeah,
and if it matters, whether it's in business or in its production, time is money. And if it matters, you want it fast. So frame.io. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah,
I was just about to say,
frame.io is
Oh my goodness, there's so many
the same
Alexes.
thing is that I have a lot of things that I store. I store a lot of things on the cloud in a couple different places to back things up. But when I'm in production, I'm using frame.io. And so that's where I put things that other people have to get a hold of. That's how I, move things around right now. And I'm in the beta for V4 right now, and it's, a lot more. We're going to have some opportunities to get more people into the beta in the not too distant future. But we're really, Frame.io is, for the last 5 years, it's pretty much the only thing, and it's stable. The one thing you have to know is that it will saturate your line the way it does uploads and downloads. So if you're on a Zoom and you say, I'm going to transfer a 2 gig file, just know that suddenly you may drop off of Zoom while transferring it, because it just sucks up the entire internet that it can get a hold of to move things back and forth, much like Aspera and other things that are similar where file transfer matters.
Alexander?
Yeah, so there's all good suggestions there. With the exception of maybe S3, I don't consider any of those a professional solution. They're all consumer grade stuff. And of course, Frame.io is a good solution as well. One of the ones that came to mind was Avid Nexus Cloud, and I haven't used that, but that's a professional solution for storage that I know a lot of people use it. It's very expensive. And other than Frame.io, I'm not aware, maybe somebody else has a suggestion, I'm not aware of another solution that's a professional solution for storage that is reasonably priced.
Next question.
Comes to us from Eduardo Augustine in Panama. I'm in search to better my video, currently using a Sony FDR AX53 4K camcorder. I'm interested in the Sony PXW-Z150, but it's discontinued. Is this a good camera to get even though it's not on the market?
Go ahead, Jason.
If you can get it for less, absolutely. Sony has kind of tightened up their fixed lens pro level camcorder line. They directly replaced it with the PXW Z280, which looks pretty nice. But yeah, that's, if you can get it for a steal, absolutely. And if not, look at what they replaced it with.
Alex?
Yeah, the Z190 is probably, the 280's there. I think the 280 is a little bigger, I believe, but the 190 is there. The other thing to think about is why would you get a smaller frame? Why would you get a smaller sensor camera? So just keep that in mind. There are reasons to do it. Run and gun news gathering. There's a good reason to do it because you want things more things to be in focus. Long throws is something that, being able to zoom in a long way is something that you may want because you want to want to be able to get to those things and have more in focus. But the modern, for many people, Super 35 has become the kind of the starter. So it's Super 35 and above. Again, there are places where they're an exception: sports, news gathering, other things like that. But if that's what you're shooting, then a 2/3 or 1/2 inch or 1 inch might make sense. But if you are looking for a thing where you're trying to sell something upscaled to clients of interviews and other production like that, even multi-camera for some of these things, you may want to be thinking about a larger sensor. In those cases, you just that starts to move you into the and there's again, you look at the form factors, and some of them are a little bit more expensive, some of them are a little less. Blackmagic has a bunch of great cameras. Sony has a bunch of great cameras out there. But really think about, as you're in this moment where you're deciding what your next camera looks like, think about why you're using the camera that you're using and if that makes sense as you go forward.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Rian Smith, who's in the West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago specifically. Hi, Alex and team. Insta360 X4 is out with 8K capture, among other improvements. Do you think it's enough to beat the Kandao Live 8K, for example, for weddings, as you suggested? And he's got a YouTube link there.
Alex?
The weddings that I did, the thing that was the most compelling was an old Theta that was half the resolution that these are producing. So, and people were over the moon for that. So I haven't used the Kandao Live 8K. And again, I'm not sure that I think you want to think about what you're using this for and who's going to watch it and when are they going to watch it. I think that thinking that people are going to watch it in 360 in in real time is, what I will tell you is it's a lot of infrastructure to do at a wedding. So weddings are, so you're really, this is a hard thing to do. I would really think more about shooting stereo 180 for post. So if you ask me, what would your wedding thing be for VR? And I would say a Canon R5C. So the Canon R5C is going to give you the ability to shoot some great stereo. It's all built together with the dual lens. It's not going to be live. You're going to capture it later, and then people can go and sit on their Apple Vision Pro or their Meta headset, and they're going to be, they're going to be able to, enjoy it, later, as if they were there. But just note that live is a complicated thing to do, and whether you need it or not you just have to always think about that. You can get a much higher quality product for a lot less trouble with a single R5C than you would with a lot of the other cameras. That said, what I was talking about in the wedding was what we did. For those who haven't listened, I think Rion's heard me talk about this before. What I did is I had a little stand and I built a little flower I actually asked the caterers for one of the tablecloths and cut their tablecloth apart, which horrified them. But I was like, I paid for it. so anyway, I built this little flower and I set it down on the stand, and the stand was like had a little quarter 20 and had like a weighted stand. This is something that Matthews makes, a micro grip or whatever. Anyway, so then it went up and I put a Theta on top of it. And as the bride and groom walked around to table, we just set that Theta down in the middle of the table and had everybody look at the camera with the bride and groom and take a photo. And we could do it from our phone. So we got out of we quietly, hid ourselves out of the shot, and shot the thing. It was very popular, because you had literally the bride and groom with the entire table as a 360 photo for every single table. And the reason we got to that is I did it with my family, a family reunion out of a just, hey, let's see what this camera does. And it was so much fun to look at that we started, doing more of them. And it really pays off when you get an Apple Vision Pro and all of those photos suddenly are spherical photos that you can look at. It makes it even better.
Courtney?
Yeah, and I just looked at the specs of both cameras, and the Insta360 X4 looks like it has 2 4K sensors back to back, and the Kando is 6 cameras and lenses in a circle that are stitched together, and those sensors are probably 4K sensors and stitched together into an 8K Insta360 image. So I would think the Kando probably has a little crack at a little better resolution, since it's starting with more sensors and higher resolution to downscale into a 360.
Next question.
Alexander Knight in Port Coquitlam, BC. Alex, I know you're a fan of Man of Steel. What do you think of the editing in that movie?
Alex?
I like it. I will say that it's a very, very well edited movie because I've never thought about the editing. Like I've never, and what I mean by that is it just tells the story. I'm not conscious to the edit. I'm just conscious to a great story, which I think that The Man of Steel is one of the best superhero movies ever made. Like, I really enjoy it. I enjoy the music. I enjoy the pacing, everything. And I might have watched it a couple times. But it is, but I've noticed that I love like a lot of the pieces, and I think it takes the most advantage of Snyder's approach to things without getting caught up sometimes in slow, detailed pacing. so anyway, I think that I think it's great. I think it's great, and again, I think it's a great edit because I don't notice it. I've never really thought about the edit until you asked. Now I'm going to have to go back and look at it and think how I feel about those edits. But what I think what it does really well is it just flows from one thing to the next, and you feel like you're just where you need to be at every moment.
When a movie's a really good movie, I feel like it almost is worth watching 3 times. You get it once, you're engrossed in the story, and you're trying not to think about everything outside of the frame. And then somewhere in the next 2, you start to appreciate all the little decisions that were made along the way, because it is tough when somebody's doing a really good job. It's their job to be invisible. Well, tough to pick up on.
One of the things, if I find myself really loving a movie, I'm always trying to figure out why. Why do I love that movie? And so one of the things that I like to do is I watch the movie and I don't want to think about anything. I just want to enjoy it. The first time I watch a movie, I just want to try to watch the movie and not analyze anything. The second time, if I've decided, oh, I really like this, and usually I've watched it now a couple times by the time, and I go, this is a movie I really like. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the audio off, and I'll sit there and watch the whole movie silent, and what I'm looking for is the edits, the pacing, the framing, all of those bits and pieces. Then I will close a week later, and don't do it all at one time, or a couple weeks later, I'll close my eyes and just listen to the whole film. Just listen to what they did, and I don't have to, what do I get out of that? And then when you go back to watch it again, it's incredible. It's just an incredible, and I will have watched all the behind the scenes, and sometimes I'll watch the director's cut. But then when you watch it again, there's just and you can learn so much about movie making. Just I buy all my, everyone has streaming. I buy everything that I'm interested in, I'm really interested in on Apple TV for the extras. That is why I'm buying them, is I want all those extra, all the things that I used to get with DVDs, because I just am a voracious extra viewer. And so I sit there and watch all the behind the scenes. I watch all the director's cuts. I watch all of those bits and pieces. And that's the reason that you buy, in my opinion, movies, is so that you get the extras.
I think I'm also over 99% of every movie I've ever bought on Apple TV, iTunes has been upscaled to whatever the best is right now. And that's amazing.
And by the way, if you do that for years and years and years, and you have 600 movies on Apple TV and you get an Apple Vision Pro, awesome. because I was talking to someone about that. And he said, only 600. And I said, well, how many do you have on Apple TV? He's like, 2,000. And I was like, you have some serious impulse control problems. Anyway, so there you go.
The bundles get you. One more question, Alex. At what point do you start skipping Act 1?
Usually after the 10th or 15th time I've seen the movie, I'm like, okay, I don't need to see. And there's some movies that I jump much faster than that, but generally I skip Act 1 after at least the 5th one is when I start going, I don't need to see the Act 1 anymore. And it depends on how Act 1 is structured too. But like most movies, I'll skip Act 1 after 5 or 6 views.
Next question.
Paul Wallace, Hot Springs, Arkansas. At what point in scaling up your production tools would you use an SNS Evo shared storage for video production? And he's got a link there.
I'm not familiar with the SNS Evo but I'm mostly a solo editor, so maybe I do color work too, but maybe I'm not the best person to answer that. Not sure if you might have stumped us there, Paul. One of these times we're bound to get it, but Bill's got something.
Well, I just took a quick look, and SNS Studio Network Solutions has a server system. It combines a SAN and a NAS into what they call the SNS system. So it sounds like it's a networking process, particularly for video production, that may have specified this. So it may be, if you have this kind of large-scale need to store a lot of stuff and access it, might be the right thing to look into.
And then the next questions that I would look to ask if I were in your position would be, what are my bandwidth needs? How many users need to be editing those files? Do they need to have concurrent access to the same, not only the raw media, but also the project files, and how are we getting that back and forth? And then weigh, what additional benefit is that Evo going to provide into my production? But we're all guilty of it, and me sometimes more than I'd like to admit, where I overbuy because I think I know what I need. And then as I go through it, I end up, not with a little bit extra headroom, but a ton. And
this is a network-attached storage solution, and there's a lot of activity in that space. A lot of people play in that, so I would imagine that it's going to require some serious research to figure out whether this system is as aligned with your needs as any one of the others. I have no clue, but that's
and sometimes
it
really pays to wait because this space is moving so quickly. As time goes by, storage gets cheaper, networks get faster. So laying down too much investment on infrastructure too early sometimes ends up with spending more. Next question.
Eduardo Augustines, back from Panama, this time asking, since we're talking about shorts and vertical videos, has anyone tried YouTube Stream on vertical, and is anyone planning on also including this if LinkedIn is in their plans? Vertical live streams show up in shorts feeds, it says.
All right, let's jump from Panama to Stuttgart. Jonas.
I think that's a great question. The biggest thing is if we go to LinkedIn, there we still are 9x16, 16 by 9. And then for shorts, we are 9x16. So you kind of need to figure out how you want to do that. There's multiple options. I know Chad is working on something. And there's multiple ways that you can generate that specific feed. But that's where I would look into. And yeah, I think it's coming more and more. We see more and more of our clients request dual workflows where you do 16 by 9 and 9 by 16 at the same time. That's one of those points where the cloud is really great, because you can just be, oh, yep, I'll take another one of those and I'll take another feed of those. And you can just mix and match that together. But I think it's coming. And yes, I think it will probably will also play with it for office hours.
Bill?
Well, this is the world we live in, and years ago, I had somebody who started asking me for vertical video. It was for a mall, and they had a lot of displays inside the mall that were vertical. They were basically just 16 by 9 flat panels turned on their side, and we had to create content for them. So I ended up with a shooting template that looked like the old Red Cross system, where it had a vertical and a horizontal. And I realized that were I to try to shoot for both things at once, I had to work in a small square in the middle. Now, that was uncomfortable, except when we finally started getting enough resolution. And if you can shoot at 8K or something like that, then you can push in and usually reframe if you want to try to optimize the signal you're catching in the center and be able to use it for both vertical and horizontal. But it does provide a lot of problems, and you really have to think through your workflow. And for me, it was always a matter of, what's my primary goal here? Is my primary delivery vertical or is it horizontal? Because I will make decisions in the field when we're shooting, depending on which of those is going to get the most traction afterwards. It's not a simple thing, in my opinion.
Next question.
Moving on to Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York. Morning, everyone. Has anyone on the panel used or have had an experience with a remote desktop manager? And if so, thoughts or recommendations?
Jeff? Oh, sorry. Jeff's in production right now, so we lost him for just a second. I looked into this. At first, I read this as remote desktop, like Microsoft remote desktop, and then I thought, oh, I use those for work all the time. That's not a big deal. Or Apple remote desktop. But then I looked into it. This is a totally different remote system, but it seems like we got Jeff back. Jeff, go ahead.
Oops, you got you unmuted, Jeff. Zoom muted.
I'm aware. I've got everything buried here.
Busy man.
Getting ready for next hour. I was confused about that also. I thought he meant just regular remote desktop because nobody that I know of uses that, except I guess now CJ. Because I use remote desktop to get into a machine in Amazon, and then I immediately turn it off and never touch it again, just to get in and get Splashtop installed or something else that's better. So I apologize. I didn't quite understand that question either.
No, that's all good. And to be fair, I don't use it to remote control a computer necessarily. I'm controlling a remote resource on a server, so it's a virtualized single app. But that's just what I got to use for work. But we'll take a look into this, Mike. Sorry that we misread it a little bit. Next question.
Roz Humphreys in Comox, British Columbia. Anybody have experience with mechanical camera sliders? I have a project I need to do some vertical video, not TikTok notes. What are some of the considerations, other than noise level?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh boy, this is a fun concept for us. Being that I'm into robotics quite a bit, we've been piddling around with some different things. So we built an 80-foot long rail slider capable of going up to 80 foot, if that's something you're looking for.
So something portable.
Yeah. It is portable. It breaks down in 10-foot sections. So we can do different sizes, different things, different speeds, depending on how much payload we need to carry with us and things like that too. Vertical is tricky, but the key to it is all in the design, and we're using linear bearings in ours, and it allows it to be nice and smooth and have a higher capacity. Our biggest challenge always is like, that balance between cost and performance. I was leaning more towards the performance side because I needed to keep up with the sports thing that's happening on a very long court, we'll call it. And so that was one reason why we had to build something that was capable of being 80 feet long. The vertical side, we've got like an 8-foot one here, I guess, and it definitely would do vertical. It's just a matter of rigging at that point. And it's all built off of, honestly, I'll cut to the chase. It's 80-20 is your friend. because you get a nice base off of that. So extruded aluminum, rails, and then the part that's really kind of the tricky is the electronic side. So I'm tying this into my motion control systems, which is Mark Robert Motions Control. So we're moving our camera, we can move the rail. It's all one continuous system. There's a lot of YouTubers that have done some different things for sliders out there that are kind of sort of okay whenever, but they're really techy, and you have to get into programming Raspberries or you have to get into ESP32s and stuff and programming those to be able to do what you need to do. It's not exactly user friendly. I wanted an interface that was user friendly. So hit me up on Discord. I could talk for hours of this. I absolutely love it, and we've got multiple different designs we've come up with.
I really want to be. I want one now. I have absolutely no reason to need that, but that just.
There's always a reason. It's maybe not a good reason, but it's a good. There's always a reason.
And I think Roz is talking about not necessarily a y-axis movement on the slider itself, but just 9:16 video. But now we know about those too. Go ahead, Jason.
Oh man, this is such an involved topic. Mark Roberts motion control, for those of you that don't know, is basically the most expensive possible way to do this. And
Nope.
Oh no! Oh, so sorry, Jeff. Please continue.
I'll definitely call you on that one, Jason, because there's a whole lot more expensive stuff. Whole lot more. When you get into film, oh yeah, totally different level. Totally.
I didn't realize that they had both rails and sliders as one thing with Mark Roberts. That's really cool. Considerations for non-insanely expensive sliders are basically the quality of the bearings, the way that it's driven, and then the interface for how the thing is going to work. I have done video production with really, really cheap sliders, and if you have a really short shot and you just want to get a clean movement, use a gimbal. If you don't have to repeat it, use a gimbal. And if you need to go vertical, unless you're Jeff, use a jib. There, I said it. But no, yes, you can get away with something really, really cheap if it's really, really small and you're willing to play with it. But understand that you're going to be playing with it a lot, and it's going to be annoying, and the belt's going to be weird, and it may or may not be moving consistently because there's rubber driving the whole thing. So just be careful.
Courtney?
I was confused about the question a little bit. Mechanical camera sliders, all camera sliders are mechanical, whether you meant manual or automated. And it depends on the weight of your camera. If you're doing vertical video, I kind of have to believe you're either using a DSLR or a phone to shoot with, and you'd only need a electronic driven motorized one if you're doing repeatability for some reason. Depends on whether you're doing tabletop or out in the field somewhere. Big ones like this Atlas here require 2 tripods to support, and they'll support a heavier camera with rails, and usually they have some wheels that roll along these rails that are urethane wheels, kind of like custom-made skateboard wheels. But you can get the cheaper ones if you're just doing a small phone tabletop stuff. You can get something like this Pro Aim video camera slider, and that'll support DSLRs or phones. And it sits on top of a tabletop, and I think it'll also sit on top of a regular single tripod. But then it hangs out on either side, and you might have to support, probably not if you have a phone, but you may or may not have to support the outside edges. And
Bill?
sound
sorry,
is
Courtney.
Sorry, wasn't quite. Sound is a consideration, although you said you didn't have that as a consideration about noise level. If you're shooting anything where you're recording sound, linear bearings can be kind of noisy because they run along a metal track, and you can hear the bearings sometimes if you're moving quickly. If you're not moving quickly, not a problem.
And Bill?
I'm just going to talk into the less expensive ones that you might use for a single project. Everything everybody said before, the more you spend, the more repeatable, the smoother and everything. One thing you might want to look for, if you just have a slider without any kind of belt drive or something like that, the camera position is going to be straight ahead, and as you move across in a horizontal plane, the framing of your shot will change. So even the less expensive sliders now often have a little belt drive system that you can set up to take the camera and point it at somebody, and as you make your slider move, it microscopically alters the camera angle so that you can keep somebody in the center of the frame across there. That is one thing that I think can be really useful if you're trying to do that kind of, I want to move on a talking head or something. You don't have to worry so much about the geometry or do that manually. So just think about that.
Next question.
Rian Smith, back in Trinidad, how can someone run StreamDeck apps in Companion? Example, Uno Graphics has a StreamDeck plugin, but I'd like to run or trigger it in Companion, as most of my workflow is Companion, not the StreamDeck app.
Go ahead, Jonas.
It often comes up that you need to use both of them. First of all, I would try to see if Uno has a way to trigger it just from Companion. Most of the time they have some way of using an API, maybe with a little HTTP magic, that should work. The other thing that you can do is in Companion, you can disable it looking directly at StreamDecks. And what you then can do is you can use the StreamDeck plugin for the Companion StreamDeck plugin. There we go. And then from there, you can actually use that to have some of the companion buttons on your StreamDeck pages. A couple point caveats with that. If you rely a lot on jumping around and have multiple StreamDecks, it presents itself as a singular StreamDeck to Companion. But one of the neat features is you can decide what companion button should go where. So like you can say page 1, you can have buttons from page 1, 10, and 11 on the same StreamDeck page. But that's how I would look into that. But Uno should also have a way to trigger it from Companion.
Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and has to do with how AI-powered content analysis and tagging will change how we store and access video and audio assets in the cloud.
Jonas?
So one really interesting thing of that is Axle AI. A lot of the time when we talk about really long-term storage, that still doesn't happen in the cloud. If it's a lot of data, tapes are still being used. What's cool about Axle is they do a bunch of machine learning they did a bunch of machine learning and then allow you to do a bunch of tagging. So in this case, you can not only get specific faces, but also, this is quite cool, it does an analyzation on scene detection. So it describes what all it sees. So it says there's a glass, there's a bracelet, and then there's another step of the AI where it goes through and describes the scene. So at that point, you can search for X doing Y. Here you can look for every time Jason took a sip. If we recorded all the ISOs of office hours, we can import it there, and then we can get a picture of Jason every single time he took a sip, because the AI could infer that. I think it will hopefully help that we have less data waste that just sits there for the sake of sitting there and actually be useful. It might be useful for highlight reels, but I don't think the storage aspect is going to be changed too much by it, except for that the storage can actually be used.
Go ahead, Courtney, real quick.
Yeah, I don't know how whether you're using it in a specific editorial program that is going to access cloud storage, but AI usually analyzes the picture and uses its own database storage, usually with a sidecar file, and stores its tokens in the sidecar file. And that is linked with a universal identifier number that is stored in the metadata of each clip. So it doesn't really change how you're going to store stuff. It just depends on what AI you're using with whatever editorial software you're using, if it's going to access that database that the AI create.
And Bill?
In 5 seconds, I already have a problem with over-tagging when I do tagging with my brain. I'm a little concerned that with all this auto-tagging, we're going to end up with so many keywords, and it's going to change how people C tagging, and they're going to expect too much and not control it enough. That's just my personal feeling. We'll see what happens.
And a player to watch in this space is we had him on with NAB, and we also had him on the show another time as the second hour guest. Michael Cioni with Strata is doing some pretty exciting things with tagging. Coming up for the rest of the week, obviously Saturday, Sunday, we have our Q&A shows. Sunday's more of an introspective show, so go to officehours.global/join us, get on the email list. You'll figure out how to log in and get into there. Also, at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern tomorrow, we're going to have our new panelist meeting. So if you think you have something to say and you'd like to see what it takes to hop up here, we'd love to see you and we'd love to have you. So stay tuned for that.